All right, so today we're going to talk about two other forms of employment, mainly freelancers versus working with a remote agency in another location. Again, we're going to look at the pros and cons of working with a freelancer in another location, usually a cheaper location, and working with a full-fledged agency with a whole institution and what the advantages and disadvantages that provides. Freelancers. What are the pros of working with a freelancer? So someone, you might be in that position where you want to scale the team and you're not finding talents locally. Usually this is a dilemma that goes through your mind. Is like, should I hire freelancers myself and build a team that way? Or should I just work with an agency and make it their problem? So freelancers have pros and cons. The pros are basically freelancers are a bit less complicated to start a relationship with than, let's say, an agency. With an agency, you might need to do some due diligence, or you might need to look at different agencies and look at their services and have a couple of phone calls and meet not just the founders, not just the account managers, but also the team. So the due diligence process might take a bit longer. Um, and in the end of the day, unless you know directly who you're working with, you usually don't know who you're working with. So usually freelancers, you know who you're working with, you know when they can start pretty much, and usually they tend to start faster. Freelancers that are looking for projects are usually offboarding another project and just looking to jump right into another. And because you're dealing with an individual and not a whole organization, that process will tend to move faster. So that's number one. Number two, freelancers will probably be cheaper to agencies. Um, so because they're individuals and they don't have operational overhead, or they don't need to pay office rent, or um, it's just them basically, and they need to take care of themselves and not like a whole company structure. They tend to be cheaper. Not always the case. Definitely not always the case. So don't be surprised if you work with with a freelancer or with an agency that have very comparable rates, even if we're talking about the same location. But you know, it in most cases, if you look at like a statistical distribution, it will probably be cheaper. Um, the other pro for working with a freelancer is that you have a direct relationship with the person, with the developer, or with the um, can be a developer. It doesn't have to be, but let's say with the developer, meaning you own the relationship to a certain extent. You don't own it as much as if this person was an employee, but you do have more control over the relationship. You control directly the compensation. You know, you can negotiate that up or down, and that can affect the relationship in a positive way. Let's say, especially in the long term. So that's the advantages of freelancers. So a bit faster, probably cheaper, and then you own a direct relationship. Now the cons of working with a freelancer. Um, So freelancers, even though they, look for projects, at the end of the day, they all want some form of security. So they wouldn't want to work for you on and off, for example, or they wouldn't want to work for you for 1 month and then have to find another project the next month. It's not good business for them, frankly speaking. So I mean, they do want job security, even though they're freelancers, but they do want these longer commitment projects that you would typically work for, and they want to as well be a bit more engaged and more involved. So, something like I want to build an app for 1 or 2 months might not be super interesting for them. They would want to work for a project, as far as reasonably possible in the foreseeable future. Typically can be 3, 6, or 12 months, but can also be much longer than that, depending on the relationship. But they do want that, so they're not as flexible as, let's say, agencies in that regard. Um, in conjunction with that, number two, they don't necessarily like having volatility in their work. So, if you tell them, hey, this month we will work full time, and say, let's take next month off, and then let's work the third month again full time. So they don't like this volatility. They want to work consistently on a product, just because it's good for their income, but also it's good for their, say, progression and their work. They can focus on a product kind of longer term. This on and off is not usually, generally is not usually good for product development, but you have to do it. Probably don't do it with a freelancer. It's not the right mindset. There are freelancers who might do it, but in general, um, it's not great for them. Number three, they will need some form of guidance. Now, I mentioned in the previous video that freelancers tend to be more independent than full-time employees, but compared to agencies, they do need some guidance. I mean, even agencies need guidance themselves, but specifically speaking, you don't necessarily need to build a career path for them, but you do need to tell them about, kind of where they are, how will they evolve, how will the project evolve, how will they evolve within the project. They do have kind of an ambition and a drive. They want to know what would they learn, how can they grow in this project as freelancers as well. And, depending on who you are, you might have the time or not to give this guidance. So this can easily take a lot of time from your agenda. And number four, freelancers compared to agencies will be really good at a select skill set or select technology, but not all of them, right? So they will not be good, they can be full stack developers that be good front end and back end, but they might not be as good in quality assurance or deployment or other roles that you might need for a tech product or a tech company. So they'll be very good in one or two core skill sets. They can learn more things along the way, but they'll never be as good as a complete IT department, right? There's the joke is like, you don't need a developer, you need an IT department. So they will not be as complete as a full-fledged team, so to speak. So that's the pros and the cons of freelancers. Now, speaking about agencies, so the number one advantage of agencies is the flexibility. So let's say if you want to work on and off, you can do that with an agency. If you want to have 2 developers this month, 4 next month, and then 2 again the next month, you can do that with an agency. You're working with a company. Usually the capabilities and the resources are there. So it's something that this unpredictability, especially if you're in the beginning of your startup journey, can be afforded by agencies. Number 2 is they're a bit more resilient, in case someone is unavailable, is on vacation, someone gets sick, especially if you're working with an agency and you have a team extension within that agency, especially if something goes wrong or something goes wrong in production or we find a bug, you will have more resources to deal with than a single person, just because it's a bigger organization and you will have that availability. Number 3 is scalability. I mean, while it's easier to start with freelancers, once you start with agencies, it's easier to scale because they are more responsible either for the scaling or the hiring. So either they have more resources on the bench or on other projects that they can reallocate to you, or they will do the hiring for you and you don't have to think about interviewing, more people to fill in those roles. So scaling with an agency is easier as well. This point number 4 is related to point number 1 and 2, but you will get a wider range of skill sets and functions within an agency. So you will not just have, one front-end developer or one back-end developer. You will have more complex roles and more specialized roles within the agency that can help you on your project, either on a part-time basis or full-time basis or ad hoc. whatever your arrangement is, there is more capability, there is more infrastructure to back that up. And lastly, the advantage for the agency is some form of shared ownership. So if you're working with a group of freelancers, so if you have a team and you decided to go and scale a team of freelancers, you do have to manage now. So you do have to manage them as a team, and if something goes wrong, you need to be responsible for kind of the root cause and try to find, where did the mess up happen? Did it happen in the front end and the back end? Was there a miscommunication between the two? Or I don't know, was the QA not involved in the planning session? You own that problem, right? So you need to go and fix that problem as a stakeholder of the project. Whereas with the agency, there's a bit of a more of a shared ownership. So if something goes wrong with the team that you hired in the agency, it's their problem, right? So you have kind of you can point fingers and they say, I need this problem fixed, and they will try to fix it for you, right? Try it. The point is try. Of course, sometimes some problems take more time, sometimes problems can be fixed, but at least you can point a finger, and then there's one individual or one account representative that is responsible for that team that can fix the problems within the team. Now, that's not to say that teams within agencies don't have problems, but at least from a user perspective, from a customer perspective, you don't have to deal with it. They have to deal with it. Those are the pros of the agencies. Now, going back to the cons. So number one, a bit evident, agencies are more expensive. So because they have a wider variety of resources, because of the resilience, because of the flexibility, they are more expensive. So if you're looking to work with agencies, you do need to keep in mind versus freelancers. Again, there can be exceptions. There can be freelancers that charge way more than agencies do, depending on the country, depending on the freelancer's unique skill set and position. It's possible, but generally speaking, agencies are more expensive. That's one disadvantage. The second con is you don't have a direct relationship with the team. So the team can be excited to work for your project. The team can be excited to come to work every day. The team can be excited to work on your product. But in the end of the day, you don't have a direct relationship. Now, with a freelancer, you have more of a direct relationship. With a remote employee, you increase the degree of the relationship that you have. So it really depends on who you are and what your needs are. This is just a intrinsic disadvantage that an agency has. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing depending on what your needs are. But no direct relationship mean you cannot control that relationship as well as you would want to, if that is your goal. And lastly, some things in an agency are a bit of a black box, right? So that can be good, that can be bad, but here I categorize it as bad, especially if that's something that you care about. So meaning an agency can have a good or bad employee retention, but you don't know how that works or why that is. And if you're in a business of creating a business, you might need to know why and how. And an agency might have motivated people or demotivated people, right? But you don't know how and why. You usually don't tend to care if they're motivated, but you might want to know, right? I mean, if your goal is to build a stronger team, a stronger culture, get people more excited about the project, you might want to know why, what makes them tick. And usually it's a bit of a black box. You have a bit of a black box on the individual team member's career path, a bit of a black box on their compensation, internal operations, and so on and so on. But again, it is an agency. It's why you've chosen to work for you. It's, you're in a position where you've made it their problem and not yours. But if you do care about these particular things, and if you're in the market of kind of building a team that is intrinsically yours, you might think that this is a disadvantage. So to wrap it up again, this turned out to be a longer video, but these are the advantages and disadvantages between freelancers and agencies. Do let me know in the comments what your experience is with freelancers, with agencies. Let me know if I missed something, and let me know if you disagree with me in any of the points.